The old house had always been a bit peculiar. Nathaniel Turner had inherited it from an uncle he barely remembered, a distant relative who had lived alone for years in the shadow of his declining health. Nathaniel had only visited the place once as a child, but now in his 30s, he found himself drawn back to it. The house was located on the outskirts of town, surrounded by acres of untamed woods, far from the hustle and bustle of city life. The air here always felt heavy, as though the house itself had absorbed generations of secrets. He had moved in with hopes of escaping the constant noise of urban life. The old house, with its creaky floors and peeling wallpaper, seemed like the perfect retreat. It was a project, something to restore and make his own. But as the weeks went by, something about the house started to unsettle him. It wasn't the drafts or the squeaks in the night. It was something far more elusive, a strange feeling that gnawed at him, like being watched from the corners of the rooms. He tried to ignore it, chalking it up to the eerie solitude that the house imposed on him. It was on a dreary Wednesday afternoon when he stumbled upon the room. Nathaniel had been cleaning the attic, sorting through boxes of forgotten trinkets and dusty books. The attic was vast and cluttered, a place where old memories went to die. He had been poking around in a stack of wooden crates when his foot hit something solid beneath the floorboards. At first he thought nothing of it, but as he examined the area closer, he realized that part of the floor was strangely uneven. Curious, he knelt down and inspected the gap. A faint draft escaped from underneath, and the wood creaked under his touch. Nathaniel found a loose board and pried it up with a crowbar. Beneath it lay a small, narrow staircase leading downward into the darkness. His heart raced as he looked down the shadowy stairwell, the air cool and musty, as if the space beneath the house had been sealed off for years. He hesitated for a moment. This was no ordinary space. It was hidden, deliberately kept from view. Yet something in him urged him to go further. It felt like the house itself was calling to him, beckoning him to uncover what lay below. The steps were steep, and Nathaniel's shoes scraped against the old wood as he descended. The air grew colder the deeper he went, and by the time he reached the bottom, he could feel the dampness seeping into his bones. The room at the base of the stairs was small and cramped, barely large enough to hold a single person. It was filled with dust and cobwebs, but something about the room felt different, almost as if it had been untouched for decades. There was nothing remarkable about it at first glance, just a bare, windowless room with a single dim light bulb hanging from the ceiling. The walls were bare, but the floor was littered with what appeared to be old, discarded furniture, a broken chair, a worn-out rug, and a cracked mirror leaning against the far wall. The room felt trapped in time, like a forgotten space from the past. Nathaniel stood still for a moment, unsure of what to make of the discovery. He turned to leave, but something caught his eye. A small wooden chest in the corner of the room, half hidden beneath a pile of rotting books. It seemed out of place, as though it had been deliberately left behind. Intrigued, Nathaniel stepped forward and lifted the lid. Inside, there were a few dusty old clothes and a handful of objects he couldn't make out in the dim light. As he rummaged through the chest, he found a strange old key, its metal tarnished with age. The key was small and ornate, its edges worn smooth, but it seemed important somehow. Nathaniel pocketed it, his curiosity piqued. He decided to take a few of the objects from the chest with him, leaving the room behind for now. He felt the unsettling sensation of being watched, but when he turned around, the room appeared empty, just as it had been before. Over the next few days, Nathaniel tried to focus on his work. The house, however, seemed to grow more oppressive. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. He would leave his belongings in certain places, only to find them gone when he returned. It started with small things, books he'd left on the coffee table, a pen he'd placed on his desk, disappearing without a trace. It was unsettling, but Nathaniel tried to rationalize it. Perhaps he was simply forgetting where he had put things. Or maybe it was the house itself, playing tricks on his mind. But as the days wore on, the disappearances grew more pronounced. Items began vanishing from places he was certain he had left them. His keys, his wallet, even his shoes would disappear from the hallway, only to reappear hours later, always in the same spot, but in a different position. It was as though the house had a mind of its own, shifting and changing when he wasn't looking. Nathaniel began to feel paranoid, convinced that he was losing his grip on reality. One evening, after returning from the store, he noticed something truly disturbing. His favorite jacket, the one he'd left on the coat rack by the door, was gone. In its place was an old, dusty coat he didn't recognize. A chill ran down his spine as he touched the coat. The fabric felt strange, as if it had been untouched for years. He quickly hung it back up and rushed to the kitchen, trying to shake off the creeping sense of dread. It wasn't long before the house seemed to close in around him. Every room felt colder, darker, as if the walls themselves were pressing in. Nathaniel began to sleep with the lights on, unable to escape the feeling that something was lurking just beyond his reach. He would hear things in the middle of the night, scraping sounds, faint whispers. But when he checked, there was never anything there. Then one night, the sound of breathing began. It was faint at first, almost imperceptible, but Nathaniel could hear it. Deep, labored breaths coming from somewhere within the house. He lay in bed, frozen, his heart pounding in his chest. The sound came from downstairs, from the direction of the hidden room. He sat up in bed, listening, and the breathing grew louder, more frantic, as though something was struggling to breathe, desperate for air. Nathaniel knew he had to investigate. He grabbed a flashlight and slowly made his way downstairs. The air felt heavy, thick with tension. His pulse raced as he approached the attic stairs and descended into the room once more. The sound of breathing grew louder with each step, echoing through the stillness of the house. He moved toward the narrow staircase leading to the hidden room, the light from his flashlight flickering as he reached the bottom. The room was empty, but the breathing was there. It was coming from within the walls. Nathaniel's mind raced as he backed away, his flashlight trembling in his hand. He could feel his pulse in his throat, his breath shallow and erratic. The walls seemed to close in around him as the breathing grew louder still, almost deafening in its intensity. Something was down there, something he couldn't see, but could most definitely hear. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, the breathing stopped. The silence that followed was thick, suffocating, like the house had exhaled a final, haunting breath. Nathaniel stood frozen in the dark, the flashlight shaking in his grip. What had he just heard? What had he just witnessed? The answer lay hidden in the very walls of the house. The room, the strange key, the objects that disappeared. All of it pointed to something far darker than he could have ever imagined. And now, he was trapped in it. Nathaniel tried to dismiss what had happened. The house was old, and old houses often creaked and groaned with the weight of time. He had heard stories of homes settling, of things shifting in the dark. The strange breathing could be a trick of the wind, or maybe his mind had been playing tricks on him, fueled by too many late nights and too much isolation. But deep down, he knew that something far more sinister was at work in the house. It wasn't just the sound of breathing or the oppressive feeling that had settled over him. It was the vanishing. At first, it had been little things, trinkets, tools, scraps of paper. He'd chalked it up to his own forgetfulness. Perhaps he'd misplaced them, or maybe the house itself was causing him to become absent-minded. But as the days wore on, it became clear that something far more disturbing was happening. The first real sign of it came when he went to make himself a cup of coffee. He had left his favorite mug, the one with the cracked rim, on the kitchen counter that morning, but when he returned, it was gone. He had been gone only for a short time, just a quick trip to the corner store, but the mug was nowhere to be found. He searched the kitchen thoroughly, even peering into the cupboards, convinced that he had simply forgotten where he'd placed it. But there was no sign of it. The next morning, his favorite pen disappeared from his desk. Nathaniel had left it there deliberately, next to the stack of papers he was working through. When he returned to the room, it was gone, as if it had never been there at all. He checked under the desk, in the drawers, in the corners of the room, but it was nowhere. A growing sense of unease began to creep over him. Over the next few days, the items continued to vanish. A screwdriver that he had left in the living room was gone by the time he returned. His jacket, hanging by the door, was replaced with a different one he didn't recognize. Then came the real test. His keys. Nathaniel had left them on the hallway table, as he always did, but when he reached for them later, they were gone. He checked the usual places, his pockets, the table, the kitchen counter, but nothing. Panic began to swell inside him. This wasn't just his imagination. Something or someone was taking these things. By the fourth day, the disappearances escalated. A family photograph, framed and sitting on the mantelpiece, vanished. He could have sworn he'd seen it there only hours before. The wall, once adorned with memories, now stood bare and silent, as if the house itself had begun erasing the past. Nathaniel felt a strange, creeping fear take root in his chest. It wasn't just that things were disappearing. It was the feeling that they were being taken, stolen by something unseen, something beyond his understanding. The worst moment came when he couldn't find his phone. He had placed it on the kitchen counter while preparing dinner, but when he went to check it, it was gone. He checked every room, the attic, even the hidden room beneath the house. Nothing. The phone had vanished. This was more than strange. It was impossible. Nathaniel had not left the house since morning, and there was no one else there to take it. The very nature of what was happening defied logic. It wasn't just objects anymore. The house itself felt like it was becoming something else. The air grew heavier with each passing day, the silence more suffocating. The once familiar creaks of the house at night now seemed louder, more deliberate. The shadows in the corners of his rooms seemed darker, thicker, like they were watching him. Nathaniel began to sleep with the lights on. It wasn't enough to simply lock the doors anymore. He felt exposed, vulnerable, as if the house was waiting for him to fall asleep. to give it another opportunity to take something. But no matter how careful he was, the vanishing continued. He began to leave notes for himself, written on scraps of paper, trying to track the disappearances. Did I leave my wallet on the desk? Where is the screwdriver? What happened to the photo on the mantel? Each time he would return to find the note gone, like everything else. It was as if the house was erasing not only the things he left behind, but his very thoughts as well. His sense of reality was unraveling. It wasn't until the 6th day that Nathaniel returned to the hidden room beneath the house, desperate for some sort of explanation. He descended the narrow staircase again, his flashlight trembling in his hand, and stepped into the room that had first felt so cold and eerie. The chest with the key still lay in the corner, untouched. He moved toward it, hoping to find something, anything, that might offer an explanation. The strange key that had come from the chest still weighed heavily in his pocket. He took it out and examined it once more, but there was nothing remarkable about it. The tarnished metal, the smooth edges, nothing about it suggested its purpose. The air in the room felt thicker now, heavier, as if it were pushing against him. The breathing he had heard the other night echoed in his mind, but now it seemed distant, fading. He searched the room, desperate to find something, anything that could explain the strange happenings. The walls were bare, save for a small mirror that had been leaning against them since his first visit. He pulled it down, and as he did, something caught his eye. Behind the mirror, nestled against the wall, was a small crack. It was barely visible, but it was there, an imperfection in the plaster, as though something had been hidden there for years. He ran his fingers along the crack, and to his shock, the wall shifted. A section of the wall gave way, revealing a hidden compartment. Nathaniel's breath caught in his throat. His heart raced as he reached inside and pulled out an old leather-bound book. It was thick and worn, its pages yellowed with age, its cover covered in strange, intricate symbols. He opened the book to the first page, and as he did, he felt a sudden chill sweep through the room. The symbols seemed to dance before his eyes, shifting and changing in ways that made no sense. It was as if the book were alive, as if it were trying to pull him in, to make him understand something beyond his comprehension. The pages of the book were filled with strange, cryptic writings, words in languages he couldn't identify, symbols that made his skin crawl just to look at. But there was something else, something that made his stomach turn. Scattered throughout the book were photographs, faded and damaged by time, of people Nathaniel didn't recognize. But one photograph caught his eye. It was of a man standing in front of the very house he now called home. Nathaniel's pulse quickened. He studied the photograph more closely. The man in the picture looked eerily familiar, though Nathaniel couldn't place him. The man was smiling, but his eyes were filled with a dark, unsettling intensity. The man seemed to be staring directly at the camera, but it was as though he wasn't looking at the photographer at all. It was as though he was looking at Nathaniel. He flipped to the next page, and that's when he saw it. A phrase written in thick, jagged letters. "Those who leave will never return." Nathaniel froze. His heart pounded in his chest, and he felt a cold sweat break out on the back of his neck. It was a warning, he realized. A warning about something he had unwittingly become a part of. The room, the house, the key, all of it had been leading to this moment. Something in this house wanted him to leave, but it wouldn't let him. The more he resisted, the more it took. He slammed the book shut, his hands shaking, and backed away. The breathing in the walls started again, louder this time, more frantic. Nathaniel turned to flee, but before he could reach the stairs, he heard it. The unmistakable sound of something moving behind him. Something large. Something alive. The house was no longer just a house. It had become something else. Something that had been waiting for him to find it. The key, the chest, the strange room. It was all part of a puzzle he had unknowingly stepped into. And now, the house was coming for him. He turned toward the exit, his breath coming in ragged gasps, and the door slammed shut in front of him. The air grew cold, and the breathing grew louder, until it was all he could hear. The walls, the floors, the very house itself seemed to be closing in, trapping him. He was no longer alone, and whatever was in the house with him was hungry. The only question now was whether or not he would escape before it was too late. Nathaniel's heart raced as the room seemed to shift around him. The house had become alive, its walls pulsating like the very heartbeat of some ancient, unseen entity. Every inch of the space felt charged, as though the air itself were thick with a sinister energy that pressed down on him from every side. The breathing behind the walls was louder now, deafening, as though it were not just one thing, but many things, all waiting for him to make a wrong move. And the worst part was, Nathaniel didn't know what the right move was anymore. His mind reeled, trying to piece together what he had learned, what he had uncovered in the strange, cursed room beneath the house. He thought of the photographs, the cryptic words in the book, the man whose eyes seemed to pierce through time itself. The house was not just a house. It was something far older, far more dangerous, and it had claimed him the moment he stepped inside. The breathing had stopped again, and for a moment Nathaniel dared to hope that whatever had been stalking him had lost interest. But the silence felt wrong, too heavy, too suffocating. His instincts screamed at him to leave, to run, but his legs felt as if they were made of stone. It was as though the house had wrapped its invisible fingers around him, holding him in place, keeping him from escaping. He glanced around the room, desperate for some way out. The book still lay on the floor beside him, its strange symbols glinting in the dim light. It beckoned him, drawing his gaze like a magnet. Nathaniel had always been a logical man, a man who believed that every mystery had an answer, that there was always a solution to be found. But now, standing in the heart of the house, surrounded by its oppressive darkness, he wasn't sure what to believe anymore. The house had taken his possessions. It had stolen his memories. It had erased his reality, piece by piece. And now it was coming for him. He turned back toward the staircase, the one leading to the hidden room beneath the house. And something caught his eye, a shape moving in the shadows. At first he thought it was his mind playing tricks on him, a figment of his fear. But no, this was something real, something tangible. It was a figure, tall and gaunt, moving slowly toward him. Nathaniel's breath caught in his throat as he recognized it. The man from the photograph. The man who had once stood before the house, smiling that unsettling smile, with those eyes that seemed to know far too much. The figure moved closer, its face obscured by shadows, but Nathaniel could feel its presence, feel its coldness seep into his bones. It was as though the man was made of the house itself, a manifestation of the darkness that lurked within its walls. The man stepped forward, his feet making no sound on the creaking floorboards, and Nathaniel stumbled back, instinctively trying to put distance between himself and the entity that was now before him. But the man, if that's what it was, didn't speak. It didn't need to. Its presence was enough. It was as though it communicated through the very air, through the suffocating weight of its being. Nathaniel could feel it pressing in on him, crushing him beneath its unseen weight. The house was watching, listening. The house was alive. The figure reached out, its hand extending toward him. Long fingers curled like claws, its skin a pale, sickly shade of gray. Nathaniel wanted to scream, to run, but his body refused to obey. His legs were frozen, his breath caught in his throat. The figure came closer, its hand brushing the air as if it were reaching for something beyond him, something invisible. Nathaniel felt the temperature in the room plummet. The cold seeped into his skin, into his very soul. And then, as if in a dream, the figure's hand brushed against his arm. Pain exploded through his body. It was as though his very essence was being ripped from him, torn apart piece by piece. He screamed, but no sound escaped his lips. His body trembled uncontrollably, his vision blurring. The house was consuming him, swallowing him whole, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. Just as he thought he would lose himself entirely to the darkness, something changed. The air shifted, and the figure, whatever it was, stepped back, its hand retracting as if it had encountered something it couldn't overcome. The breath he had been holding rushed out of his lungs, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Nathaniel could move again. He staggered back, his legs shaking, his mind struggling to comprehend what had just happened. The figure faded, its form dissolving into the shadows, leaving Nathaniel alone in the cold, empty room. But he wasn't alone. Not really. The house was still there. The house was still watching. Nathaniel turned and fled up the narrow stairs, not daring to look back. The walls seemed to close in around him as he ascended, as if the house were trying to pull him back into the depths from which he had just escaped. He reached the top of the stairs and stumbled into the hallway, his breath ragged, his heart pounding in his chest. The house was still there, still alive, still waiting. But now, something else was different. Something had changed. The vanishing, the eerie breathing, the creeping presence. It was all part of the house's hunger, part of its insatiable need to consume, to claim what was its own. And Nathaniel had been caught in its web, a spider's prey, waiting to be devoured. He made his way back to the front door, the place where it had all begun. The door was still locked, just as it had been the night he first stepped into the house. He pulled on the handle, but it wouldn't budge. The house wasn't going to let him go. It had already taken too much. But Nathaniel wasn't ready to give up. He wasn't ready to become just another lost soul wandering the halls of this cursed place. He grabbed the old key from his pocket, the strange, tarnished key that had been the catalyst for everything that had happened. It felt heavier now, its weight pressing down on him, as if it had become an anchor, tying him to the house. He shoved the key into the lock, twisting it with all his might. The mechanism clicked. and for the first time in days, the door opened. He blinked in disbelief. The air outside felt warm, welcoming, and Nathaniel stepped through the threshold, out into the light of the world he had nearly forgotten. He was free. But as he turned to close the door behind him, he saw something that froze his blood. The house. The house was still there. The windows were dark, the door wide open as though it were waiting for him to return. The vanishing, the strange figure, the breathing, it was all still there, still waiting just beneath the surface. And Nathaniel knew deep in his gut that the house would never truly let him go. Because it wasn't just a house. It was a thing, a presence, an ancient being that fed on the souls of those who wandered too close. It had taken his past, his memories, and it had tried to take him. But Nathaniel had escaped, for now. As he stepped away from the house, the wind picked up, carrying with it a whisper, a voice, faint and distant. But it was there, and Nathaniel knew that the house would never stop calling to him. It would always be there, waiting, just as it had waited for everyone who had come before him. And no matter how far he ran, no matter how many doors he closed, Nathaniel would always hear that voice in the back of his mind. Always. The house was never truly gone. It was only waiting for its next victim.